Thank you. Next in this session is Dr. Luca Foschini. He's the president and CEO of Sage Bionetworks, and his presentation is Challenges in AI and Machine Learning for Health, Bias, Generalizability, and Privacy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. I'm Luca Foschini. I'm the president and CEO of Sage Bionetworks, a nonprofit based out of Seattle whose mission is to speed up the translation from health research into medicine. Prior to that, I was co-founder and chief data scientist of Evidation Health, and I spent a decade working on AI ML algorithms for person-generated health data, such as data from wearable sensors and apps. I'm sure you read the news. The AI walks among us. ChatGPT is a chat box released by OpenAI at the end of November, has crossed 1 million users in 5 days, and it's quite incredible. It can talk about recipes, speak about any topic confidently, even put that in the style of Snoop Dogg. It can find bugs in your code, and now it can even pass the US medical licensing exam. ChatGPT has taken the world by storm, but raised many questions at the same time. Is it accurate? Is it safe? Is it private? Is it reliable? All those questions can be subsumed under a single one. Can we trust it? Is it trustworthy? And trust is a funny thing because it takes forever to gain it and just a second to lose it. In this example, ChatGPT consistently insists that the word 5 has 5 letters, despite recognizing how to spell it correctly. There are many examples all over the internet of this kind of blunders that people call hallucinations. This is a particularly powerful one for its conciseness and blatancy, but there are many others. All have in common the fact that ChatGPT is confident in the answer and confidently wrong. I'm not here to play gotcha with this objectively no short of incredible system, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's so easy to dunk on ChatGPT because, again, trust is established in the absence of untrustworthy behavior. Proving a negative is very hard, impossible to do empirically. Therefore, any counterexample gives us a good laugh and becomes sufficient to deem ChatGPT untrustworthy. With that in mind, all we can do is to list out a set of conditions we deem necessary for trustworthiness as a society and score our system with respect to them. There have been a few attempts to do so in the literature, and luckily the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that is a lighthouse in the definition and promotion of technological standards in the US, just a few days ago came out with this guidance document around risk management in artificial intelligence systems that really starts with the question of trustworthiness and connects us to the underlying dimensions that are important to us as a society. Validity, reliability, safety, security, explainability, interpretability, privacy, fairness, with accountability and transparency being transversal to all of them. Today, we're going to focus on privacy, fairness and bias, and validity and reliability that underpin all other characteristics. Let's start from validity and reliability. Roughly, they speak to the primary requirement of any piece of empirical research. The research findings are required to generalize across similar domains of applications and over time. A valid result should at least be reproducible. And when we took a look at the machine learning research landscape 2 years ago, we found, like many others, that that's not always the case. We looked at 300 plus papers in 4 domains of machine learning, including computer vision, natural language processing, and machine learning for health, denoted by ML for H in the visual, and also general machine learning, which is a catch-all for all others. We defined some necessary conditions for reproducibility, such as that the code was available, the data was made available, A1 and A2 in blue in the picture. The model performance had variance reported around point estimate B1, and that the methods that were tested on multiple data sets for generalizability, C1 in the picture. When pitting each machine learning field against machine learning for health across this dimension, we could find that machine learning for health is usually the one underperforming the other, as you can see from the multitude of points falling above the bisectors on all plots. There are several reasons why that's the case. Data in healthcare is more scarce given its sensitivity, hard to come by. Labels tend to be noisier because sometimes they come from human judgment that are not directly tied to underlying measurable systems, such as diagnosis. And institutions have different ways of collecting data that might introduce different biases that are unknown at the time of collection. Reliability means, for example, that the AI cannot be easily fooled, and we've all heard about adversarial examples. From stickers put on stop signs that make them disappear in the eye of a self-driving car, to 3D printed turtles that are mistaken for a rifle under any angle of view from a computer vision system, as you can see in the left-hand side of the slide, there has been a great deal of example in which by having access, or in some cases not even having access, to the underlying model, one could strategically construct an input that would fool the system and that will never fool a human. This has been demonstrated also in the health sciences as well. With co-authors, we've shown that an ECG deep learning algorithm trained to detect atrial fibrillation can be fooled by simply adding some strategically generated noise to the single lead channel. The noise, called smooth perturbation in the picture, changes imperceptibly the shape of the signal. It will never fool a cardiologist's eye, but it does make the classifier switch the prediction from healthy to atrial fibrillation and vice versa in a systematic way. In the next part of the talk, we'll be looking at bias and how it can lead to lack of fairness of a model output across, for example, gender and ethnicity. But unknown or unrecognized bias is also the main culprit behind lack of reproducibility. When unknown bias in data collection is present, data sets that should be the same on paper could lead to wildly different model performances of model trained on them. This is the case we're going to make in an upcoming work where we're looking at published papers on machine learning models trained to detect COVID from Fitbit data. Your Fitbit would record a higher resting heart rate, maybe increased sleep, less steps when you're getting sick. And these machine learning models can pick up on those patterns, learn them, and map it to a sick versus non-sick day outcome. While technically all trained on people who caught COVID, these models trained on different datasets would obtain very different performance in terms of area under the ROC curve and identifying whether a given day of worth of Fitbit is belonging to a COVID day or not. And I'm talking performances varying from low 50s to mid 80s. But when we plot that performance as a function of prevalence, we see that there is a wide variety of prevalence of COVID-infected people included in different data sets. Sometimes even order of magnitudes away from what the average prevalence of the United States was during the period of collection. Assuming all groups know how to do basic machine learnings, AUC shouldn't vary too much with prevalence. So what really this plot is telling us is that this very different prevalence in their very different data sets is actually hinting to the fact that these are different data sets pertaining to different cohorts coming from different distributions. Some might oversample severe cases, some may drop negatives, some others might clip days around onset days and sick days. If machine learning for health is hard to reproduce in general, as I showed you earlier, if you add the time dimension to it, meaning if you talk about time series in machine learning for health, then you really open up the door to more ways of introducing bias, therefore irreproducibility. While unknown bias that causes irreproducible result is annoying, far more dangerous is the kind of bias that may generate unfair outcomes for a subgroup of people. The next part of the talk is about fairness in AI. Bias in AI in healthcare is no novelty. In a 2018 NeurIPS paper, Dr. Iran Chen showed that a classifier trained on clinical notes to predict mortality would exhibit unequal error rates across races in the prediction task. That means the algorithm will show better predictive accuracy for certain races as compared to others. From that point on, there has been many examples of algorithmic bias in healthcare. In a 2019 Science article, Obermeyer et al. Shed light on unfair triaging of different populations to receive the appropriate level of care. The racial bias identified reduced the number of Black patients identified for extra care by more than half. Bias occurs because the algorithm identifies historical health costs as a proxy for health needs. Since less money is spent on Black patients who have the same level of need, then the algorithm falsely concludes that Black patients are healthier than equally sick white patients. More recently, algorithms that measure oxygen saturation from photoplethysmograph signals have also been found to exhibit racial bias and cause unfair treatment as a consequence, exemplifying the fact that bias can affect any algorithm, not only ML-based ones. More recently, an analysis by Stat News, not peer-reviewed, of last month looked at 518 FDA-approved AI products and identified a concerning lack of representation across different ethnicities, geography, and annotators in the datasets described in the submissions. In all cases, less than 10% of submissions claim to have been tested across multiple race, gender, site, or annotator. The last 5 years of research have shown that it is possible to create fair algorithms even in the presence of biased data, but it becomes harder and harder to do so when the discriminated against group is heavily underrepresented or completely absent in the training set. A model cannot mitigate bias that it never observed in training data, so lack of representation of training datasets, which is already undermining the generalizability of our research findings to all of us, now can also undermine the ability to create fair AI algorithms that work for all of us. Bias can be subtle, and it never sleeps. I wanted to touch on this example here as a reflection that fixing the training data bias is not sufficient to mitigate the overall bias of a model. If we go back to ChatGPT and we go down the rabbit hole and learn more about how it was trained, we learned that ChatGPT is based off of GPT 3.5, which in turn, it was trained as an unsupervised model by looking at all text on the internet, and from looking at words that go more often together, it creates a representation model of how language works. However, ChatGPT goes one step beyond GPT-3, and it uses human labelers or annotators for both a-supervised and a-reinforcement learning fine-tuning steps. That turned out to improve accuracy of the model significantly. But who are these annotators? These are people whose identities, cultures, beliefs, and the set of values they have are affecting the kind of responses ChatGPT provides. And we have little information about whether they represent or not all of us. In the case of ChatGPT, annotator bias layers on top of what could be defined as classical training set bias, which is present in the original text collected from the internet. The last part of this talk will be about privacy and need to create models and systems that don't inadvertently leak out confidential information from the training data. We know that for large language models, like the one behind ChatGPT, that is not the case. The grandparent of ChatGPT, GPT-2, released over 3 years ago, was susceptible to straightforward extraction attacks. That means that using a prompt of, for example, a street address that you might find on a map and feeding it to the model will happily autocomplete it and spit out the name and telephone number or other sensitive information of a real business housed in that street that just so happened to be part of the training data. The same fact could be deleterious in settings related to health and medicine. For most of my career, I've looked at sensor and consumer wearable data, and these are becoming increasingly part of our electronic health record, as they should, because they can now measure things related to our heart functions and sleep and activity, things that are related and adjacent to our health. Now, the step counts returned by one Fitbit device look like the one on the right-hand side of this slide in machine-readable format for each day, the number of steps walked that day. But if we think of each day of steps as a die that could take 1 out of 1,000 possibilities, let's say from 0 to 1,000 steps just to make it easy, then any specific pair of 2 days can be considered as taking 1 in a million chance to realize, assuming independence in between those 2 days. And a triplet will take 1/1 billion chances to materialize, and so on. You quickly understand that a handful of days of step counts may be unique for a person in a certain data set for a specific device. And imagine if I were to get a hold of a few days of someone's Fitbit data because they posted them on their social networks bragging about the achievement of last week. And the same exact data through a machine-readable API ended up also in their electronic health record and had a model trained on them. Now I could use that unique signature of a few days of Fitbit data to cue the model into an extraction attack and get out the data that's adjacent to those steps in the electronic health record, meaning the sensitive health information that that person might have stored and that got encoded in the model. In general, any potentially innocuous and generic snippet of data could be used for an extraction attack to get someone's data out of a model that has not been trained in a privacy-protecting way. Now, the good news is that there are mitigations for all the issues I showed you. You can train models in a way that generalizes across datasets and time, that can maintain a certain level of privacy, including differential privacy guarantees, and that can maintain a certain level of fairness in the face of bias in the data. The bad news is that those mitigations are usually helping one factor while at the same time hurting another. Validity, fairness, privacy, you can't have the unconstrained maximum of all of them at the same time. You have to deal with trade-offs, and there are many you can choose from. What NIST recommends and what the community has come to start recommending is to first and foremost nail down the context of use of how the AI will be used, using a risk-based approach. What is the application at hand? In low-risk environments, such as that of hypothesis generation that might be more relevant to research and scientific discovery, privacy may still be very important, but validity perhaps is not. You may be okay with a language model that hallucinates a new target for Alzheimer's there. Actually, maybe we need it to get us unstuck from our human biases. But as you move more towards the practice of medicine and healthcare, and the immediate risk of hurting people is higher, you may want to pick another trade-off that emphasizes safety and transparency. Each use case will require striking a different trade-off, and that is what humans are expected to come up with. That is the job of us humans. Ultimately, to conclude where we started, trust cannot be proven exhaustively, but it can be described with a set of criteria we care at the societal level that we should be able to verify, and among which we strike trade-offs about relative importance as a function of the context of use of the AI system at hand. Public verifiability may be hard to achieve in the face of the necessity to not being able to release data and models publicly due to privacy, safety, cost, or intellectual property concerns. But figuring out a way to ensure public verifiability of trustworthiness in the face of private models and data is where we should focus our research. It means creating proofs and certificates attesting the people that are going to be using a certain AI system were at the table when it was designed. It means creating ways of scoring datasets for representativeness by automatically computing on them a data nutrition label that somehow measures the composition of the dataset. It means creating metadata in standardized format around models in health sciences to describe where the training data is created from, the context of use, and the suggested trade-off around different trustworthiness criteria. It means creating infrastructure to run performance benchmark on different datasets even when the test data cannot be publicly shared. Ultimately, it requires creating a system of incentives at the society level, through policy changes or otherwise, to incentivize model builders to openly demonstrate trustworthiness of their AI system even when the underlying data or algorithms cannot be openly shared. Thank you so much for the invitation. Please feel free to reach out at the address below for comments, questions, or suggestions. Thank you.